Hey, Ray, sorry I'm a little late to the podcast. I had to take out the trash.
Well, that's pretty appropriate, Adrian, compared to how the Mets have been doing for the last month or so since we did our last podcast. Taking out the trash is pretty appropriate.
How much of it you want to take out is my big question.
We better back up a dump truck because we've got a couple of full dumpsters and full diapers to get rid of over here.
Let's start the podcast. Hey, this is my friend, Ray.
What's up? This is my friend AD.
Ray is a tour manager who's traveled the world with everyone from the Beastie Boys to the Rolling Stones, engineered artists from Devo to Jane's Addiction to Selena Gomez, and looked after the careers of comics like Jim Gaffigan and Dane Cook.
And AD is a national radio personality, heard on stations across the country, who started off as a major label recording artist that gave me my first job as a tour manager.
I still can't believe that ended well.
Well, we still talk all the time now, and when we do, it's about music and cooking and baseball, especially our beloved New York Mets.
This is Bands, Barbecue, and Baseball. All right, so my big question for you is, obviously, there's nothing from this season that makes me go, oh man, we got to hold on to that. It's just such an epic collapse since the All-Star break, and everybody wants to make cuts and everybody wants to make changes, and it feels like it's a smart thing to do. But my question for you is, how deep do you cut? At what level of the organization do you go, you get to stay?
I personally think, and this is I'm going to try to sound as positive as I can, and I'm traditionally a very, very cynical man. But in terms of Steve Cohen's, taking over the team, and his first year now sitting in the throne, let's call it, and overlooking his kingdom and surveying the land. I think this might have been just it's a good thing that he now has gotten this year under his belt. It's not a good thing that they had one of their most legendary collapses in comparison to the 2007 collapse, the 2008 collapse. This collapse of August into September ranks completely up there in terms of disappointing results of a team that we expected a lot more of. So I personally think Steve, now having a season under his belt and seeing I see how this goes, me sitting here at top, I think he firmly now can say, you know what? Wash my plate clean. Him keeping Sandy around, I don't necessarily see as a horrible thing in the terms of that I've been looking at Sandy as a placekeeper literally since he decided to come back. I think that's always been kind of the intention of that. But now I think it's really, really, in Steve's court of saying, I want to bring in this guy. I want this guy to make the choices. The building up of the depth of the team has certainly been the rationale and reason for what they do. And got to remember, this is all still kind of with a new CBA coming in. So there's several variables that we don't know about yet that'll determine, I think, a lot of things about which way they go with it.
I think the idea was, or at least the fanciful notion was, that, all right, Sandy Alderson had to bow out of being the Mets guy to go deal with his cancer. He kicked cancer's ass. He came back, and all of a sudden Steve Cohen's the owner. And I think we were really, really excited. We're like, oh man, he loves the Mets. He's done a great job with the Mets. Let's see what he can do with some resources. He deserves to literally take a real swing at this, which we kind of felt like he'd never gotten to do because of the whole situation with the Wilpons. And I think, they said at the beginning of the season, we're not going to go out and spend like drunken sailors. And they spent a whole bunch of money on one guy who very noticeably did not live up to expectations with regard to what we paid for him. Like Francisco Lindor was a $341 million man, and he was pretty much impeccable defensively, but just, failed to produce in an extremely obvious way as a batter. So yeah. It's one of those things where you kind of look at Sandy, and I have a hard time figuring out where the buck stops, especially when you have, you got Zach Scott and you got Porter, who kind of exited the season in disgrace at various times, where all of a sudden Sandy has had to do a whole bunch of stuff that Sandy shouldn't be focusing on. So like I look at Sandy and go, you're kind of on your way out, obviously, but I believe in what you do. And I think if you hadn't had such a ridiculous season to contend with, and if, your $341 million man was half of what he was supposed to be, then, we could be looking at something very different. But I do look at Sandy and keep coming back to that thing that you always say, champions find a way. And I think that goes all the way up to Sandy. And I love Sandy, but if a change were to happen at that level, I hate saying that, but meh.
I think a change is coming at that level without a doubt. Whether it's a transitional thing with Sandy still kind of in the mix for just say even this next season would not surprise me. Someone coming in, someone with the bona fides of the reason they're coming here. Certainly not someone untested and untried. It trickles down to the obvious Luis Rojas criticisms and complaints about his managerial background, experience, lack of experience, and in-game management. So that's another aspect to it. The aspect of what, say, a general manager or a president of baseball operations is going to do when they come in here is not the I hate to say it, spend like drunken sailors. I don't think he's going to spend like a drunken sailor. I think he's going to spend like a sailor who just won the lottery. I think he's now going to literally say, whatever your luxury tax threshold is, I don't care.
Well, the collective bargaining thing, I think one of the things that they're addressing is the luxury tax. I think that, I think there's, that and universal DH seem to be hot button issues where it's
the thing about, say, like the luxury tax threshold, which they've already kind of been bantering around and talking, they're talking about either not necessarily raising it in any certain way, but maybe even stabilizing it with a minimum salary, say $100 million minimum salary that all teams have to at least spend, which will force the hand of teams like the Pirates, et cetera, who have literally gotten away with not paying players or losing players that, they should have been paying for. So those, the compression between a minimum and a maximum might not necessarily raise that maximum. But my point is that the financial obligations and responsibilities that the Mets now have to just literally maintain exactly what they're doing in terms of operations, plus Cano's salary coming back on for $20 million, to me means that they are pressing past or certainly going past any threshold that will exist. And if you're already going over the threshold, as Steve said, if you're going to go over it, don't go over it by a little bit, go over it by a big bit. So if they have to sign Javier Baez to $20 to $25 million AAV a season, if they've got to re-sign Loop as a reliever, they've got to sign Stroman because they need starting pitchers. All of those things are going to add up incrementally and not cheaply. And the things that are coming off the board. So, for instance, Familia's $10 million comes off the board. Betances' $10 million comes off the board. Great. You still need.
Wow, I had completely forgotten about Betances. That's so funny you should say that. I was like, oh yeah, he's a Met.
Yeah. I mean, like that was.
Sorry, Betances.
That was to me the building up of depth that we were talking about. So that in terms of anybody that's leaving, and the expression is, well, that money comes off the board. No, it doesn't. That money's got to go to somebody else, and probably has to go even a little bit more than what that was in order to fill them correctly.
Yeah, the price of gas appears to be going up. I can't imagine the price of starting pitching is going down. know?
Yeah, and if you've got a mortgage on your house, if you move to a different place, your mortgage is probably going to be in the same ballpark of what your mortgage was or otherwhere.
Well, that's the whole thing about the housing market right now. Everyone's like, holy crap, my house is worth 3 times what it was when I bought it. I should sell it. But then I got to buy a new house when all the profit will be gone because like the housing market has gone up. I think and it's interesting because, prices keep going up. You Tatis and Tatis, like the price for shortstops most recently, hitting $340 million, like blew right by what Bryce Harper had established. You know what I mean? Like, yep. and so like that is just demonstrable cost of doing business in the world of baseball is going up. So to like not address where the luxury tax is when you have to spend $340 million to get a Tatis or Francisco Lindor, I think, it has to be addressed. And I think Steve Cohen's right. If you're going to do it, blow by it. Don't just go over it, because like, I got to hold on to this one guy.
He said firmly that when he bought the team, he said firmly that I expect to lose probably roughly $400 million over the first couple of years in just operational getting things back, in place where we're a big market team, so you got to spend big market. We're also having to rebuild in motion, which is going to cost you. The Yankees for years were always kind of a criticism of them was that that players used the Yankees to drive up their price to the other teams that they actually eventually signed for. That's as much an indictment of the Yankee system of being, such a high profile, high level, money organization. That's as much an indictment as it is as an excitement of look what the Yankees generate of somebody who wants to come here, come to New York and play New York for them. The New York Mets now are in the same boat where players are going to use the Mets in negotiations and get paid from other teams by playing off the Mets and had no intention of going there. You
get a straw man offer from the Mets where it's just like, I'd love to play in New York. Right. You know what really lights my fire? Flushing.
Yeah. Well, how about this? How about Steve Cohen makes it, no, this is not a straw man offer. If, say for Javier Baez, if he's worth $25 million a year, for a 6-7 year deal, and that's what the going price is for him, very upfront, here you go. Like, this is what the price is to have Javier Baez on your team for the next 6-7 years. Stroman has certainly set his own market by having taken a qualifying offer of $18 million, and honestly, he's one of the best pitchers in the National League, if not Major League Baseball, in terms of his consistency this year and getting it done. He was, in my opinion, mismanaged how he was used, so his record completely doesn't reflect how well he pitched because you've got Luis Rojas, who pulls him out after 85 pitches in situations where he at least could go another inning or two to a 6th, maybe 7th inning, and then you're handing it off to relievers that could actually hold a lead. So, there's a lot of elements to the contracts and the way they're going to work. Obviously, the CBA will come into effect, but I think this is going to be the wake-up call of all wake-up calls for Steve Cohen and whoever comes in, either albeit a Theo Epstein or a Billy Beane or whoever has the bona fides experience of coming in and getting things straight. And that person's going to benefit from an owner who's going to say, here, I need to win this, so here's the money.
All right, so back to my original question. You keep Alderson. Let's move down the line. Like, in your mind, we're keeping Alderson. I think in everyone's mind, it's funny because people love him, but after this season was so disappointing. To be in sole possession of first place for the better part of 90 days or whatever it was, or so the better part of the better part of 60 days. And then to have the complete second half collapse. It makes, if we sucked the whole season, I think people would feel more attached to this team than if we had than how it played out. Like, if we'd just been mediocre at best the whole season, if we've been struggling to make it to 500 the entire time, I think a lot of people would probably have more sentimental attachment to the team, the players, the management, whatever. But to come crashing down in that way was such a wake up call for everyone. So, it made people go, okay, there must be changes. So in your mind, we are keeping Sandy. Let's go down a notch. All right. Anybody else we're keeping?
Well, certainly not certainly not anybody else in the front office in terms of, say, Zach Scott or et cetera, who obviously burned his bridge. He was on on eggshells as an interim general manager to begin with. So
people did like him for a second there, people liked him when we were in first place for whatever it was. 45 days.
I think his moves in the down to the trade deadline weren't horrific moves. Yes, they could have maybe done a bit more in terms of we're right there and we need these extra puzzle pieces. A team like the Dodgers went out and got Max Scherzer, went out and got they lost Bauer, who they paid $40 million to, and said, you know what? Okay, we lost $40 million on him. Let's go get the best guy who's available. Oh, and we're gonna go get the second best guy who's available as well. And guess who's on top? Geez, I haven't looked at the standings. The Dodgers are right there in the playoffs again for the 8th year in a row. So in terms of how the Mets front office was handled by Zach Scott, I don't think he necessarily did the worst of jobs, but circumstantially he's played himself out of a gig. That being said, whoever comes in here completely deserves to make the choices of everything down the list from there, because certainly Luis Rojas, whose contract is up, it would now be rehiring him, say, for a new contract. He's not going to get a new contract. Thank you for your service. Hope you do well in the future. Luis will probably hook up with some team as a minor league manager, which he's very well suited for and needs to learn more about.
Well, do you think he might? Do you think he might get sent down? Be like, hey, you want to go back to doing AAA? Yeah,
no, I have a feeling that it doesn't work that well in being in the same
getting demoted in the same organization doesn't that doesn't sit well with the Luis Rojas's of this world, especially if they do come up with a manager that looks like they're in it for the long term, because Luis is going to be like, I guess there's not space for me to move up in this organization. I got to start looking around.
No, exactly. And this is an organization that has taken guys like Edgardo Alfonso, who is beloved in Mets history and everything. He was released as manager in our minor league system, recently, right? I mean, they certainly moved on from even fan favorite kind of people for whatever reason they've done. So I think they're going to have to go very, very much with a proven commodity, somebody who can literally command respect on the field as an on-field general, and there are those guys out there. There are baseball lifers, same way that the Astros picked up Dusty Baker. Dusty Baker.
I'm still of the opinion that we should have gotten Dusty Baker. He's one of those guys that I've always liked, and and has been easy to like, and then gets results. I hated when we were losing to the Washington Nationals, when the Washington Nationals were a thing, but under Dusty Baker, that team kind of flourished, and it was what we were talking about. I think Luis Rojas is a very smart guy, and he's very good at what he does. But you look at people in his position that are succeeding, and they're a million years old. Is
he very good at what he does?
I think so. No, obviously, that's a bit of a loaded gun. But I do think he has potential to be great, but I think there's something about managing at this level, especially the in-game management. Here's the other thing in Louis' defense. Do you something that coincided with the Mets' second half decline was getting people like Conforto back off of the IL. And here's what Luis Rojas did. He managed to piece things together in that first half like one has to do in the minor leagues, where you couldn't go, this is my everyday whatever position player. He had to chop and change and rely on the bench mob and, basically string something together out of nothing a lot of the time. And he won doing it. And I think as, someone who has managed in the minor leagues, he's used to that. He did not know what to do when it's just like, hey, you got McNeil and Conforto back off of the IL and they're sucking. How are you going to handle that? It's that. And, it's a tough one for him to deal with, because I think his gut would be like, well, Conforto's back, but he sucks, so I'm going to play somebody else and right. Like that would probably be his gut, but you can't do that because, Conforto's in his walk year. Conforto's a star. And that is, in addition to some of the questionable in-game things that he clearly wasn't prepared for. The other thing is, how do you manage a star when they're slumping? Because we had a lot of those. And, obviously the hitting coach situation, offensively, the team has been very disappointing under two different hitting coach regimes. But, it comes down to, Louis, what are you going to do about this? Do you talk to the hitting coach? Do you get a new hitting coach? Do you and that was where he seemed out of his depth to me. What to do with a star that isn't producing?
Well, there's a very, very traditional or historic comparison to something like this, and it's always brought up the fact that Mickey Mantle got sent down in his obviously first couple of years, like just time that he just came up with the team, but in terms of, say, a Conforto, if you are a team. Well, we'll say it. If you're a champion, if champions find a way, if you're having diversity or having problems with someone, you've got to have the ability to put that guy aside or put in the right pony for what you need to do. And that's how our August fell apart. That's how our team couldn't hit with runners in scoring position. And it was very obvious. And they made absolutely no change or shuffling of the deck or anything to compensate of, man, we're not getting it done. What do we do? And star power means absolutely nothing to me if you're not doing it. You're only as good as what your average is, your stats. And if you're not producing, then you literally have to get out of the way for any of the bench mob or anybody else who's actually producing. And you're right, like the way they were doing earlier in the year, albeit they were saved a lot of times by how well our pitching staff was doing. So there was a decent enough balance of guys coming through in clutch and a pitching staff that were holding leads, finishing games, and that all went by the wayside. And it's horrific. It's horrific the way that Louis' in-game managing really came to the forefront in very, very obvious ways down this stretch, where the criticisms were completely legitimate of when he pinch hit somebody or pulling starters way earlier than necessarily you might in a tough situation down the stretch in a playoff stretch where you're trying to get everything you can out of these players. There's a balance obviously to be made of keeping guys rested for the postseason, but that is the most difficult decision I think a manager has to make, unless it's completely obvious that your pitcher is melting down. When do you pull your starting pitcher? Like that is the most maligned decision in all of baseball management, and there's no one I can think of where people go, oh yeah, the manager of our team really does a great job knowing when to put in get the bullpen moving. I can't. The people I know hardcore Dodger fans that bitch about it constantly. Every single team fan I know complains about their manager, specifically the in-game management, specifically when it comes to when to pull the starting pitcher. It's got to be the most difficult decision in all of professional baseball. Sure, but Louis in his post-game interviews and conferences came up a lot of times with nonsensical explanations of why he did what he did, or literally like eyebrows raised across the entire room of journalists, of fans, knowledgeable fans watching his press conferences, saying what you're saying right now, or what the excuse you're giving makes absolutely no sense. His justifications for a lot of his moves or his pinch hitting or his calling up of a lefty righty kind of situation. He had all these he had all these very just kind of BS sounding kind of rationales and reasons, and that, especially New York and in the fishbowl of New York with the media, that's not going to play. So like reversing around to what we were originally discussing about who goes with this and there. Louis, I wish the best for. I would say that I really like him. He's a 39-year-old man and knows his baseball. I wish him success somewhere along the line, and that he gets another shot at managing in the majors when hopefully he has now learned, holy crap, this is how you have to manage in the majors.
I think what was interesting to me was Taijuan Walker was very open about not like he didn't. It's not like he didn't throw a fit about it, but he was very clear that he wasn't happy about being pulled after what was it, like 88 pitches against the Phillies the other day, and he was like, nobody asked me about it. I think that was the wrong thing to do. I'm trying, like, obviously, like he's had he went into the All-Star game. Excuse me, an all-star, and came out not an all-star. And a lot of the talk has been about he's coming off a Tommy John surgery. He's only got so many pitches in it, and so like I get it. You're thinking your guy's done for the season essentially. Like he was all-star caliber up until this point, and he's still technically recovering from surgery, so it's not going to be awesome for the rest of the season. But he was having an amazing game, and he got yanked after 88 pitches, and when he openly said, I was not a fan of that. That was when I was just like, oh, there it is, open rebellion against Louis' decision from a member of the team. That was like, okay, he's lost the goodwill of the people that are playing for him.
Yeah, and there's a lot of down roster decisions that a trusted baseball man that'll come in and grab the reins is going to have to make a lot of decisions about. And I mean, the variables of those decisions are actually pretty wild, pretty wild and wide. I mean, let's put it, here's a perfect example. There are a lot of people that are still not convinced that Edwin Diaz is our closer to be kept as a closer. And he has stuff. I mean, it's very obvious he's got stuff, but does he come through in the big time for the Mets? No. So do you take Diaz, who still, I believe, has 2 years left on his deal, obviously has the goods? Do you take him and say, you know what? He's not our closer anymore, and trade him for what you could get for him, and elevate someone else like an Aaron Loop or a Lugo, or dare I say, Thor at 29 years old, coming off of 2 years of Tommy John surgery, etc. Do you literally go to Thor, to Syndergaard, and say, you know what? What if we transitioned you into an elite closer at your age, where you spend the next 10 years redefining the closer position to where, the legendary closers in this game that are now Hall of Famers, the Mariano Rivera's, et cetera, like that. Say 10 years from now, Thor now is going up for Hall of Fame level numbers as an elite closer. Is it better to use Thor with 60 plus appearances, where he can get maybe 50 plus saves for the Mets? Or is it better to have him starting 35 games a season, winning hopefully between 15 to 20 of those, or risking the chance of him getting hurt again or having to pitch his style? So there's
already been talk of him. There's already been talk of Thor coming back in a role in the pen. And I have to imagine that on the one hand, you're coming off of, what is it, 2 years of not pitching now? Like it's 2 years, right? Or is it more?
It'll be 2 years this offseason, because, he had the full year off. He started to go back into his pitching regimen. They shut him down. He's now throwing some I guess, live batting practice kind of situations. So they haven't sent him down for getting any starts. And there's very little time left in the season to do that. So I mean, it's going to be 2 full seasons that he did not. Start.
On the one hand, yes, elite closer. On the other hand, even at 29. Yeah, and I think Syndergaard is smart enough to have recognized the fact that, 2015 him might never come back. I think he's smart enough to have recognized that stuff. And he's also smart enough to have seen Jacob deGrom develop in his way. And he was smart enough back in 2015 when he was pitching on the same team as Big Sexy. And he was like, yeah, he's my Yoda. Like, I've seen how he's managed to pitch like that into his 40s. So I think he's one of those people that he's one of those pitchers that shows so much promise as a starting pitcher. I think moving him to the pen as an elite closer is just going to be, on the one hand, you get an elite closer. On the other hand, you possibly lose an elite starting pitcher. And those are harder to come by, I think.
Yes.
Well, no,
yes.
It's all hard to come by. Pitching is always hard to come by, but still.
In my opinion of pitching, I think is actually kind of developed over time, where I used to be fairly critical of pitchers, like why can't they pitch like they used to back in the 50s and 60s, and throw so many complete games and like that, and all this stuff. My personal feelings about pitchers over all this time now has been watching guys not have the longevity of careers that they might not have, that the thought of going to a 6-man rotation because, it takes everybody a little bit out of their routine, yet they're getting a little bit more rest. I personally have been looking at pitchers in a different light over the last couple of years, and I tend to think being a little bit more protective of them, or understanding that they may not have as long a career being that level of pitcher. So I certainly think that you can never have enough pitching. So keep going after pitchers, keep signing pitchers, keep doing that. But role-playing pitchers, I could totally see Syndergaard being a Dennis Eckersley kind of guy who started as a starter and then transitioned and is Hall of Fame level pitcher as an elite closer. And he's not afraid of the big role in New York City. He doesn't shy away from that. So
he really has become a New Yorker.
Yeah. The thought of him coming in, if we are actually in the playoffs and the game on the line and Syndergaard comes walking in, I've got a lot of faith in him in that terms. Right now, I couldn't have any less faith in Diaz in a big spot if we were in the playoffs. I just got to be honest. I just don't know if he's got it. He's got great stuff, but I don't know if he's got the moxie for the big spot in New York in the playoffs.
Edwin Diaz is one of two things. He's lights out or a heart attack. And it really, I think it's got to be a mental thing with him, because he's when he's not the guy you need him to be, he is so far removed from it. He's just, like something happens where his confidence gets shaken, or baseball and the entirety of life is a game you play between the ears, and something happens between his ears sometimes where he's not who he needs to be, and he's not pitching like he needs to pitch. And he is either going to be lights out, and it's all, you can almost tell from the first pitch how it's going to go. And if the first pitch isn't where it needs to be and what it needs to be, that it's either going to go to hell or he's going to find some way to get through it, but it's going to be a nail biter, because he's either lights out or holy crap.
Well, the transitions that we have now coming up in this offseason, and whoever's going to be making those determinations and decisions on how to rebuild our, maintain our depth, to release and trade off parts to get other things that we need, combined with the fact that I've been repeating this over and over again, that the Rule 5 draft that's going to be coming up, expect that we will lose somebody in the Rule 5 draft that we had no intention of losing, that everyone's going to literally turn around and go, wait a second, how did we lose that guy? That's the nature of the Rule 5 draft, and how players are shifted around from team to team in that position. So you combine those things with what the Mets need to do and spending their way out of it. I think it foretells somebody coming in, and the deep pockets of Steve are finally going to be tested. We were making a joke actually on Twitter about Moneyball, and, and there was a picture of It was the commissioner with Steve Cohen, and they were having a little aside talk, and it just literally looked like Steve Cohen telling him, "Hey, I'm going to spend like crazy next season, and I'm gonna make you puke from how much I'm going to spend because they're gonna kind of have to. They're gonna have to ride a high payroll for a good long time. The promising kids that we have coming up now that have actually been going and rising up through the ranks, the Brett Beatties and the Alvarezes and the Eventos and everything. We got some good young guys that are really establishing themselves. So the balance of a team is veterans, role players, and youth, and you balance out all the money that's being spent by the fact that the young youth, you have 6 years of control of them, of lower prices before they're arbitration eligible. You have players that have been playing for a couple of years that become arbitration eligible, and now they're starting to get their first payday. A la Pete Alonso is coming up on arbitration. Pete Alonso is one of our best players. He is going to...
Yeah, he's had a lousy season, and he's still hit 33 home runs this year.
Yes, and leads the team in RBIs.
And he's the nominee for the Roberto Clemente Award. There's like nothing better than Pete Alonso out there. Like right. There's not.
So in the very least, I mean, in arbitration, he's going to make a good fair amount of raise. How about literally you want to show someone appreciation? Give Pete Rose a preemptive, high dollar figure or contract. This is how much we. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Pete Alonso. Did I say Pete Rose?
You did say Pete Rose. I was like, well, no, because we were talking about managers. I was like, Pete Rose, high dollar contract. Interesting.
Well, Alonso, I would preventively give him a reward. Guys, the guy's one of our best players, and yes, he's still arbitration eligible young player, and so you ride that for a couple of years. We're going to have hopefully the next wave of young guys coming up, which is going to make the guys affordable that we want to say get rid of. So, for instance, I love McNeil. I love the Squirrel. He hasn't been really doing it. I love Dom Smith. I really do. He hasn't been doing it.
Well, I mean there was that core of reliability last season which is Dom Smith, Jeff McNeil, and JD
Nimmo.
Davis. Yeah, and Nimmo. Nimmo, he's still been an on-base machine this year, right? Like, I don't think Nimmo's performance has fallen off as dramatically as those three.
No, it hasn't. The only criticism has been that he gets injured or has been injured, but he comes back after injury and he hits a triple.
Yeah,
the question was whether he was say a fourth outfielder. No, he's your starting center fielder and deserves to be.
Yeah, and he's got and it's funny, he's still Guy Smiley and everything, but there's a certain edge that's crept in with him, and it's not like his attitude has changed at all. He's still that gee golly guy with a can do attitude, but he really presents himself as someone that's been there for a while now. He feels, like when you see him talk and when you see him play, you're like, that's a big leaguer. That's not like someone who you're like, maybe, like he inspires confidence. And I think that's, really what it all comes down to, who inspires confidence and who does not. And there's not a lot of confidence, being inspired by any of the players, except for perhaps someone like Brandon Nimmo, except for someone like Pete Alonso, even though Pete Alonso has just, 33 home runs. You can't take anything away from that. Obviously, home run derby doesn't mean anything in the real world, but nevertheless, the guy can clearly hit. That is not in question. But the whole thing of not being able to hit with runners in scoring positions, that is a problem, not just for Pete, but for the entire team. But when you have someone who's, what do we have left? 15 games, 14 games, and he's already hit 33 home runs. We were jumping up and down all over ourselves to sign Cespedes when he hit 35 in one season, and Pete's, probably gonna sail by that before the end of the year. So, I think that Pete Alonso is an obvious, gimme when it comes to what do we think of as being a long-term Met. But the bottom line is that none of it means anything if you can't hit with runners in scoring position, which is a problem with the entire team. So Cullibone, Quackenbush, whatever the interim hitting coach is, like, he's clearly toast. Who is there anyone else that you think it might it's easier to say who do you think we keep as opposed to who do you think we jettison at this point?
I can actually I'll go jettison first. Actually, I have a feeling that we will not see JD Davis anymore. I think he gets traded. I think probably they'll field offers for McNeil, and if they get a good offer for him, I think they'll let him go. I think the same with Dom, and his stock is not worth as much, but I think they're anticipating that they're going to get Cano back and are going to have to, if the DH comes, they're going to have to wind up DHing him because they want a legitimate shot at signing Baez to play second base. They need a third baseman. There's talk of elevating possibly Brett Beatty if he can handle it as a rookie third baseman, if he can handle it. So there's that balance between rookies, role players, and top echelon stars and veterans. The team itself can probably fill its 40-man roster while still shedding several different kind of things. The Michael Conforto situation, it's funny how they keep mentioning Alex Castellanos as an available option. That's almost tantamount to the situation the Mets were with Real Muto becoming available, and they didn't get him. He signed.
Yeah, Real Muto though he'd said he doesn't want to go to New York. Same as Scherzer, to be fair. I think we were all very disappointed we didn't make more of a splash right before the trade deadline, and there was some chitty chat about Scherzer coming to New York, and Scherzer was like, no thanks. Don't want it. Nope. Mets schmets. Absolutely not. And I don't
appreciate that. I appreciate a guy who says, I don't want to come there, because it takes a special player in person to play in New York. It takes even more special to play for the Mets because it is a unique situation and not everybody can handle it. So I appreciate that kind of straight up honesty. I don't want that.
Well, and it's interesting because the agent has to be like, no, we can get your price to go up if you say you're willing to play in more places. It means that Los Angeles can be like, well, he doesn't want to go to New York, so let's take Uncle Steve's money off the table. Now what are we dealing with? So it was very upfront and honest. So it was an interesting situation with that. By the way, when we're talking about things we can get rid of. The entirety of Major League Baseball's bullpen was hamstrung by this stupid 3-batter rule. If you ask me, once you got to the pen, it made it a crapshoot. It really did. So many people were bitching about how their pens had meltdowns. I had a friend who was, texting back and forth with me during us getting swept by the Cardinals, where he was just like, he was like, oh, you guys are going to get to our pen and it's all going to go to hell. Our pen sucks. I was like, everybody's pen sucks because the rules make it just I don't know, who knows, is Bryce Harper going to get drilled in the face because of the 3-batter rule? That seems to have been what happened. And so it's just, it doesn't allow managers to manage. And especially when you've got someone like Luis Rojas, where you're just you're kind of new, your in-game management isn't awesome. Can we give this guy a little bit more rope? But the 3-batter rule, and once you get to the bullpen, was just, I just absolutely nothing to do with anything good. I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand it.
That could very well be a CBA a negotiated situation because, to be honest, a pitch clock would make so much more sense than that does. A pitch clock where every single pitcher, starter, reliever, etc., have a countdown clock of you made your pitch, the batter swung or fouled off a pitch or anything like that, and boom, there's a countdown of when you have to make your next pitch by. And
I get people want to speed
would be that big.
I get the fact that people want it to move quickly, but you know what? Baseball is not basketball. It's not soccer. It's not hockey. It's not constant nonstop action. It's a lot of stopping and starting. And I like it when pitchers take their freaking time. I really kind of it adds to the drama in high leverage situations. I'm a fan. This whole trying to speed up the rate of play. I don't understand. like I get that they feel like it moving faster will attract a younger audience with shorter TikToky attention spans, but like I don't find that necessary. And I think the reward from doing something like the 3-batter rule or adding a pitch clock is going to be so minuscule that it's, like just figure something else out.
It's sand in the hourglass though, and it accumulates up over the time of the game. And if that was the case, then certainly you can make say it's not used during the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings of a game or into extra innings, so that drama like that you're referring to, comes into play. But the majority of time, a lot of it has to do with time management, similar to why the intentional walk is now just literally
that does make sense. Like that you can be like, I'm just gonna walk him, as opposed to although you always had the excitement of like, oh, I went to the backstop. But that like something like that, I suppose I could get behind. Not having to throw 3 fake pitches to someone just to put him on first base does make sense.
Yes, and the traditionalist in me and everything should be completely stomping my feet about, say, the DH, the universal DH coming. But I've almost thrown up my hands about the fact that the DH it was an inevitability probably. And so if the DH does come to the NL, so there's a universal DH, they want to protect pitchers. They've seen now what happens when American League pitchers have to bat in National League games, and they're scared crapless, of what happens when a pitcher has to run the bases or this.
Well, I mean, it gives the American League a ridiculous advantage as well, But it's one of those things where I just maybe we get to a universal DH, maybe we don't. But I thought it was criminal that Major League Baseball could not get its head out of its butt during last offseason to say, hey, all that money you're spending right now, this will give you an idea of what you should be spending it on. They're like, maybe not. Who knows? Anyways, go spend $20 million a year on a player. Have fun with that. It's just like, what the hell? Like, how could you do that to teams and owners and all of the above? It's just so stupid that they could not get that figured out going into this season.
The history of Major League Baseball and the Players Association, and now how very, very intently we should all be watching these CBA negotiations, because it's completely possible that they could really could fumble everything and we have a work stoppage again. I mean, that's a legitimate potential of happening with all this crap.
Well, there's certain team control and stuff, and you had a very good idea, I thought, and I can't imagine that it would be adopted because it's a very good idea, but you had a very good idea of treating pitchers like an entirely different animal when it came to things like team control, because you do see this over and over again. You got, before you get to free agency, your arm is completely burnt out. So especially if you're one of those guys who is throwing 100 plus miles an hour, well, your expiration date's going to be sooner. If they say, hey, we want you to come in here and light up the speed gun. We want you to be 100 plus. That's what we're looking for you to do. We need someone who can just throw a mind-numbing fastball. We need you to be Aroldis Chapman, someone like that. Like someone who throws like that is going to have a shorter career than someone that's in the outfield. So, subjecting them to the same amount of playing time before they hit free agency and can collect their big check is, doing them a tremendous disservice.
Yeah, my concept is taking the entire pitching staff, both starters, relievers, minor league players, etc., and make it literally a pitching department that's a completely separate roster from the other players, so that you can expand it to more viable, available pitchers across both your starters and relievers, so that you expand the amount of availability of pitchers. You also make the flexibility of going back and forth between the majors and the minors so much more flexible, so that your large scale amount of pitchers that you've got are staying in rotations or staying in their rotated relief or how often they're throwing on the side, etc. And you look at them in terms of this entire separate pitching department that makes it very, very easy for the fact that if a pitcher like a Thor goes down with Tommy John surgery and for all intents and purposes wiped the next year and a half out of out of his availability to you, that it doesn't hurt nearly as bad to a team. With the perfect example would say there's $100 million minimum now that teams have to spend. So teams like the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Tampa Bay Rays, et cetera, are now having to spend more money on a viable amount of players that can play for them. If you lose your star pitcher to Tommy John surgery for a year and a half to almost 2 seasons, it doesn't destroy your entire team. It doesn't destroy your chances at going to the playoffs, et cetera. Make it so much more availability of pitchers that they're not made to have to pitch so much longer necessarily than they have to in terms of their career. That younger pitchers who need to come up because your starting rotation has holes in it, make those moves back and forth so much easier to be had. I mean, that's just my concept of how pitching should be handled going into the future. And I hate to see in a blowout game that your shortstop has to come in to pitch.
Yeah,
that's it. To me, that's idiotic.
It's true. Do you think we wind up keeping Michael Conforto?
It's a very good question. I have my personal feelings about it. One, because he's a first draft Met. He's a homegrown player, right? I've got a lot of.
He's homegrown that became a star.
Yes, I've got a lot of sympathy for homegrown players that, yes, he's had a down year, and yes, he had his down year in what should be his contractual year.
Yeah, no, this is where he was gonna, your walk year. That's where you want everything to line up right, and you want to go for the most money possible. And it's interesting because I think there's a qualifying offer out, and I'm pretty confident it's going to be rejected. And I think the qualifying offer is, hey, here's $20 million. And that's not bad. And it's interesting. If you were Michael Conforto and you'd had a disappointing walk year and you were offered $20 million to play one more year, and really kind of set yourself up, bet on yourself and your ability to turn it around in the next season, would you reject that $20 million, or would you go, nope, I'm hitting free? Would you reject it and head to free agency, or would you go, yeah, sure, absolutely, I believe in myself?
I'll tell you exactly what I would do, and it would involve not necessarily taking Scott Boras, his agent's advice on things. I would look at all of the side benefits and things that I want. So, for instance, I get the complete and total thought that he does not want to leave New York, that he really likes being here. So that has always been implied a quote-unquote home team discount. And whether that's a legitimate thing or not, he has to weigh the fact of whether he wants to stay in New York or not. So if I was Michael Conforto and I just had my contract year and I did not do very well, the $20 million offer of a qualifying offer just literally puts him back in the same exact situation where he now has to play the best he possibly can to garner a contract going after next season. If I was the Mets, I would look at him as a homegrown player. I would give him the benefit of the doubt that he had a kind of offseason, and I personally would offer him a $60 million 4-year deal, which is $15 million AAV a year with tons of incentives, meaning that if you reach this goal of, at bats, if you reach this goal of RBIs, if you reach this goal of home runs or high average or OPS, I would make every one of them an incentive that he can certainly make tons of his money if he reaches the things that he has. And I would also do all this without offering him a no trade clause. A no trade clause is something that the agents really go for, so it gives the player a real leverage in there. I would say no. I'll give you 4 years, $60 million, and they're showing you that we want to keep you, but if you have another bad year after signing a $60 million deal with a no trade clause, I would feel completely free, if I was the Mets, to say, you know what, I'm going to field offers for you if that was the case, and I'll even pay part of your owed money salary to a team to take you to make an enticement for them to take him, because obviously you gave it another shot and you did everything you possibly could to show him that you want him, and he still hasn't done it. If he does do it, then he benefits, you benefit, and he stays in New York where I believe he belongs.
Well,
So
I think I can't imagine Conforto going for that, because it's like $60 million, and 4 years from now, I'm all used up. And meanwhile, Francisco Lindor made $341 million for 11. And like 60 versus, like, when you have that number flying in front of your face. So I remember at the beginning of this, at the beginning of the season, when they're like, all right, let's extend Francisco Lindor. And, we've also got to worry about Michael Conforto. This was everyone thought Michael Conforto would be amazing, and the price on him would be high at the end of the season. So everyone was saying, like, oh, they've got a $500 million payroll problem they've got to deal with between Lindor and Conforto. Like, that could easily get up to, $600 million. And so, like, I think that, like, even if it's not, $341 million, I think someone like Conforto's got, like, he's seen the deals that people are getting, and he didn't have a great season, but he's got enough of a sample size to get more out of someone. Here's what I think Conforto's doing. This is my thought. Like, the one thing you talked about was home. I have heard numerous people say that the Seattle Mariners are looking to spend like drunken sailors. They've got a bunch of money burning a hole in their pocket. They haven't been in the playoffs for a long time. He's from Seattle, so I think it's going to wind up being a bidding war between New York and Seattle if Scott Boras is playing his cards right. Either place, I think Conforto would be very happy to go to.
No, that's a very good possibility, and of the teams that would give him more than, say, the Mets would after a season like he just had. I think his options maybe not nearly as much as it might possibly be. And you're right, if a team like Seattle got into a bidding war with the Mets, then the Mets would have to go up from what I'm saying. I mean, by the way, I like, knowing nothing about like Seattle or the American League in general, I don't know who's in right field for Seattle at the moment. Are they any good? I think they were trying with one guy that used to be a former Met in the outfield, and he hasn't been doing it yet. If you know what I mean, Mr. Kalenic. Right. So I'm not totally sure what Seattle would do, and especially in that division, there's a couple of teams in that division that haven't made it in a while, and they're going to want to battle for players. I always remind Mets fans, especially when they're talking about contracts, etc., like that we're not the only team, that there are 29 other teams that we have to also if the vibe was great and we were on top, people want to stay with that. Right now, everyone's got to be looking at each other going, that's good. It's not that I really like you, but we're losing. Maybe there's a better place for me. Maybe there's a place where I can flourish. Maybe there's a place that I don't know isn't cursed. So it's like I don't see anybody giving Conforto $25 million a year on a longer term deal based on what he just did. So I'm looking at the things like I offer you the chance to stay in New York if that's what you want. I also offer you a chance to make a shitload of money. A boatload of money if you perform just the way that you can, like the incentives of playing. If he does even what he normally should do, then that 15 mil guaranteed would turn into 20 or 22 million dollars a year based on the fact that he's done that. Also, those things could be open up for renegotiation. To me, it's showing we want you. We're not suckers, but we want you. And if they did get into a bidding war with Seattle, they would have to literally balance it out to say, do we want to go that deep on, say, Michael Conforto, or okay, let him go, and they're going after a Castellanos, or they're going after another big right fielder, which is yet another position that they need to fill in this offseason. They've got some holes that they got to fit, that they got to plug, and each one of those are expensive positions. Not a single one of them are inexpensive. Baez is not going to be inexpensive. Stroman is not going to be inexpensive. Do you think? Okay, so here's the big question. Ever since we lost David Wright, we don't have someone reliable at the hot corner. There was a thought that it was going to be JD Davis. I don't believe that that's really the focus right now. Could you put Baez at third? You totally could if they also say decided that they were going to have to pay Cano to actually play, or there's also, I mean, there's been talk about literally going after a Correa from the Astros, who's also a free agent, and there was talk of having $100 million infield, literally between, say, a Baez, a Lindor, a Correa, and Alonso. That's an elite infield, but it's $100 million infield just right there in 4 players. So this yet again is a Steve Cohen question. How far are you willing to go to stack the deck? And I think he's going to have to stack the deck no matter what it is, just in maintenance. I think Syndergaard, he's not going to let Syndergaard go. And if it's a qualifying offer, okay, I would still offer Syndergaard a contract. I would definitely offer Stroman a contract. I would without a doubt offer Loop a huge contract, because he's proven himself. He's one of our best relievers, and now we're about to lose Betances and Familia. So we have a hole in our bullpen. They've got a lot of decisions to make, and every one of those decisions to me are expensive decisions, and he's the right guy to pay for it.
Do you think Nolan Arenado has said that he expects to be a Cardinal for a long time? I think he could walk after this season.
He's got an option.
Yeah, he's got an option, but again, his agent must be like Ixnay, because I think he's like, I expect to be a Cardinal for a long time, and his agent must be like, no, hey, talk about how you like Queens.
No, let me as a Met fan, who's my entire history has been getting screwed by the St. Louis Cardinals. Let me give the St. Louis Cardinals all the credit that I possibly can. They have always fielded fantastic teams, have always flipped over their teams and plugged in the right guys. They've never shied away from, say, a big deal, etc. And St. Louis is a great place to play. So I have no doubt that he might literally fit in there and say, you know what, this is the place to be, because the Cardinals are a strong organization.
They've just got this history that I'm so jealous of, and and seeing obviously getting swept by them, is pretty telling, but just that play that Goldschmidt made, the other day, it was just like there was nothing anyone could have done about it. That was just the fact that you've got a Gold Glove caliber guy on, third and on first. They've got gold at the corners.
Who came over from the Diamondbacks because the Cardinals went and got him. And Arenado, because they went and they said, oh, he's available. I don't care what he costs. Go get him. Yeah. They do what the Mets are going to have to do. Get the guys that they need, but they're in a different position. I think anybody could come and flourish in St. Louis as a player, because it certainly is not the fishbowl that New York City is. There's something about New York that not everybody can handle. Not everybody can handle the media press that's here. They can't handle the Klieg and the Broadway kind of style of everything. Baez has obviously shown that he completely can do it, and I have a feeling he either signs with the Mets or the Cubs. He either goes back to the Cubs because they love him so much, or he signs with the Mets and is like, I want to be here when this wins, because when you see New York win, it's a whole nother level of everything, but it's not for everybody. So that's another comparison.
I think the one thing that would keep Baez, well, there's two things that would keep Baez. One, a whole bunch of money. Two, his friendship with Francisco Lindor.
Yeah.
I think that, because the experience of, and that's the thing, it's just like the same way we're looking at all these players going, keep Alonso. Beyond that, whatever you want to do, I don't know, I don't care. Because it's been such a disappointing season. The players have to feel that way too, and we are privy to what we watch on TV, what we read, and what we read has been written by a bunch of people that really have almost not that much more access than we do to facts. It's cool that the sports writers get a chance to ask those questions in person, but it's not like anybody really knows what's going on except for the people playing the game and the people that are managing the game and the people in the front. The people that are part of the inside of the organization know what's up. And I would have to imagine that there is probably frustrations like you wouldn't believe. I think, for someone like Taijuan Walker, who seems so easygoing, to be like, I was not happy about being pulled after 88 pitches. the amount of things that had to happen for him to get to that point, him being the even-tempered guy that he seems to be. He seems very mellow, very laid back. And that's, it's kind of insubordination, going out in front of the press and being like, yeah, that sucked. That's, and so like to have gotten to that point, there's got to be a whole bunch going on within the organization where a lot of players might not feel like their best opportunity is playing there. There's a lot has been made of the fact that they're very close, they get along really well, all this sort of stuff. But at the same time, if you are not being put in a position where you feel like you can win and flourish, and you're being asked to do things that you think are stupid, then you're going to start looking around too. Listen,
I'll give you an example. Anybody can have a podcast. Not everybody can have a fantastically elite podcast.
Right.
You and I just happen to have.
Right.
It. So, it's an embarrassment of riches, to be honest with you. But the parallels of what you're saying are exactly right. And I bring it back again to Steve Cohen, and now having had a year to kind of look at it and examine, and I just have a feeling, in a sense, that it's not spending like a drunken sailor. It's spending like a rich sailor, and I think they're going to have to import the people in that they want to. They're going to want to keep the people that they really do want to keep. As much turnover as we've talked about, that, oh my God, the team sucked. They're not even 500. So we got to have a big turnover. There are a bunch of players that we want back, and all of the Aaron Loops and Stromans and Baez's, etc., are going to cost money, along with Cano, who is now, whether we want him or not, I think he's our DH when the DH happens, and he's going to be there.
Well, there might be some people that say, Pete Alonso is a DH when the DH happens. He's obviously made great strides, and he's been very upfront about being like, I want to win a Golden Glove, and everything else that he's talked into his existence has happened. But, you see, like, if he goes to DH and Dom Smith gets a chance to play his natural first base position, defensively alone, Dom Smith justifies that. Obviously, you want someone that can hit, but as someone who has hit in the past and who can play first base like that, I would not be surprised if the DH comes along and, Alonso spends some time DHing.
Yeah, and that is a very important decision that the next baseball man, next president of baseball operations or general manager or whoever's coming in, those are the tough decisions that they're going to have to make. And it's also, even spending a ton of money, that's still looking at where and how you're going to spend your money. You got arbitration for Alonso, and so he's making, say, $6 million a year. There's a point very soon, Alonso continuing the way he is a $25 million a year player, either at first base or DH.
Yeah.
So the transitional part of a team has a lot to do with the reason why you feel like you need to draft so well is so that your players that come up, the young ones, you have a 6-year controllable, part of their contracts. So they are the lower end of your payroll for several years as they come up. And during that time, you're paying some high leverage all-stars and veterans to balance out your team. That's why I just personally don't think the Mets payroll under Steve Cohen will ever go down to, say, middle of the pack kind of payroll. I think it's now always going to be one of the top payrolls in the game, and that's, you can look at it. It's the Dodgers, it's the Yankees, it's the Mets, it's the Chicago Cubs should be there in the place where they're at and the type of ownership they have. There's a first and second level in terms of money in this game and how it's dished out. The Mets need to take advantage of the fact that they have that, so that no player is out of range of us being able to get. And just like the Dodgers did, the Dodgers went out and got whatever they needed, and guess what? They're in the playoffs again. That right there is the how, what, and where of what you have to do to be a top echelon major market team.
Do you think, well, one last thing before we wrap things up, and when we're talking about things that we want to keep and things we want to get rid of,
You mean our beautiful wives?
Well, no. I was thinking more along the lines of Steve Cohen tweeting, but sure. Let me tell you, keeper. So like there are people in the press who I think are really just looking for something negative to write about, that are saying that like Steve Cohen's done more harm to the Mets than Francisco Lindor has by costing $341 million and not hitting. Like, what's he doing to the organization by, like mixing it up on Twitter the way he is? It's just the end of the world. And like, I think everybody points to that thing where he went, other teams seem to have a better approach. I can't understand how professional hitters can be so unproductive. Other teams have a different approach, which is, it's big talk, but at the same time, I don't know. Did you see that as a negative at all? Like, I really don't have a problem with anything that Steve Cohen has done thus far.
I have no problem with it. And to be honest with you, it put in other circumstances. If Steinbrenner was alive during this time, he would make Donald Trump look like an infant in terms of his social media, just expounding and just kind of floating things out there. I have absolutely no problem with how Steve Cohen conducts himself. The playful part where he, literally asks questions of the fan base and says, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And yeah, he'll make a comment here, a comment there. I think he has the complete and total right to make any comment that he wants. He's not being, divisive. He's not stirring a pot and making things, horrible, horrific, in my opinion. I have absolutely no problem with how and what he's been doing. And it's the sign of the times. It's the age we live in.
I think what was the thing that people had a problem with? Like there was an article, a Mike Puma article. What does Puma write for the Post? I don't know. There was some article. Mike Puma wrote it, and there was a source. And he did a thing. He was like, first person who gets the sources right gets to sit with me in my box during games. And he was like, the first three people do it because someone got it too quick. And then I can't even remember who he said the source was. And Mike Puma was like, that wasn't my source. But it was like this whole thing of like basically publicly calling out the source on Twitter saying, I know who you are.
You know why I don't know? Because I don't care less. I saw that and I was starting to kind of follow along with what was going on, and then I thought about it and I was like, I don't care I don't care who said it. I don't care what was said, and I don't care his reaction to it. Because basically, literally, all I gave a crap about was the fact that the teams can't score with runners in scoring position. None of that other crap mattered to me at all. I was way more dialed into why the hell can't we score with a man on third and nobody out? Like I couldn't care less about what that whole situation was.
Yeah. No, it is that. I don't know. I'd have to look around the league and see if other teams have similar woes, but it's just, it never, ever, ever fails. Be like, there's no one out and the bases are loaded. I'm just going to go away and go to the restroom and return to a lopsided. What the hell just happened? How are we still losing? How is this possible? We had the meat of our order coming up and the bases loaded and no outs and okay. All right. Never mind.
Well, that's the greatest comparison because like we were just talking about a team like say the St. Louis Cardinals, a successful team. What do they have? 3 beat writers that followed them in town. We've got there's 100 reporters and social media people and Twitterers and podcasts, etc., that follow the New York teams around. You're in a big fishbowl here. There are teams like the Pittsburgh Pirates, etc., like that. What do they have? 2 people who covered the team, and everything's a fluff piece for all intents and purposes. So it's a different animal being here, being in New York. I keep saying here, but being in New York and being in that environment. So that's what you buy into when you come to New York. Yeah. We didn't even discuss the fact that there was a controversy of Baez and Lindor where they kind of fronted up to the fans with the whole thumbs down thing. That literally happened in the span of time since you and I did our last podcast.
Yeah.
And that was two and a half weeks ago. And it's an afterthought. It doesn't matter. We moved on.
Well, it does really show how quickly you can get fans back on side by hitting. Yeah, like it's just like, people were just so over him. They're like, what? He's trash talking us. The Mets front office put out an apology. It was a big thing. And, they said, and they said, we're sorry. But they were like, oh, sorry. Sorry we got caught. It's just like, so it's like, because like they've been doing it for a while until like Baez, was like, oh, yeah, that's, they boo us. So that's us booing them when we get on base. And people are like, what? You've been doing that for quite some time now. I was like, yeah, how about that? Everyone was just like, we're done with him. Well, it seems like his fate's sealed. He's not coming back next year. Cranks a couple home runs, and all of a sudden everybody's willing to lay down their lives for the guy.
Yeah. Producing will do that. Producing in New York will definitely do that. So
in summary, the Mets suck. The season is gone. But next year, we're going all the way.
I think we're going a lot further, I would hope, because as historical as this collapse has been, we've been down this path before. It's happened. It's not a shock. It's not a shock. It shouldn't be a shock that it happened. Let's just onward and upwards. Like, please, learn from this.
Uncle Steve.
Completely.